So in the aftermath of the January 6th Trump riots and the hundreds and hundreds of arrests and starting to see the processing into the court system of some of the alleged criminals, the rioters, one of the questions that we've discussed and one of the questions that's come up is not only what are these individuals going to be charged with, but what would prosecutors be able to prove? And some of the most serious charges that could be levied against some of these individuals would be charges of sedition. And as we said when we talked about this, maybe a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago at this point, as some of these cases were starting to be built, was that sedition, much like perjury, can be obvious colloquially and yet very difficult to prove in a court of law, because you do need to be able to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that the mindset of the perpetrator is knowable and that you can say this was their intent when they, in the case of perjury, said something that was untrue under oath and meant to overthrow the government when they were participating in the Trump riots. Well, it appears as though prosecutors, at least in some of these cases, believe that they can do that, because there's a new New York Times report from just the last few hours, which says that, quote, evidence the government obtained in the investigation into the January 6th attack on the Capitol most likely meets the bar necessary to charge some of the suspects with sedition, according to Michael Sherwin, a federal prosecutor who's been leading the Justice Department's inquiry. This was from an interview yesterday. The department has rarely brought charges of sedition, writes the New York Times, the crime of conspiring to overthrow the government. But in an interview with 60 Minutes, Sherwin said, quote, I personally believe the evidence is trending toward that and probably meets those elements. I believe the facts do support those charges. And I think that as we go forward, more facts will support that. This is obviously not going to be the charge for most of the hundreds of people that are going to be charged or have been charged here, but it appears as though some will be, and this is major. It's been 11 years. You have to go back to 2010 for the last time that there was a federal charge of sedition, and that was a charge against a Michigan militia of plotting to provoke an armed conflict with the government in order to overthrow it. They were ultimately acquitted. And back then, and this goes to mindset, the judge in the Michigan case from 2010 said that the Justice Department, federal prosecutors, did not prove the defendants were concretely trying to oppose and overthrow the United States government. So this is going to be, I don't want to say these are landmark cases. It seems hyperbolic, but this will be a really big deal, because now we have not only rioters inspired by Trump, not only rioters inspired by the lies from Trump and his followers and others on the right, that Joe Biden stole the election as the reason that they were doing this. But we may see some of these very, very serious federal charges of sedition. And it's going to take some time for all of this to work through the system and to ultimately see what is there. Now, I think it's also important in terms of expectation setting. Even if there are charges of sedition, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see trials with guilty, not guilty verdicts deciding on sedition. You could see some of these individuals, rioters, charged with sedition initially, but then it never goes to trial, and there's a plea agreement where they agree to plead guilty to something lower. And there's no question. I mean, listen, if you said it's a numbers game, if you see 10 sedition charges, I don't know how many you'll see. If you see 10 sedition charges, I would imagine that the vast majority, 7, 8, you never get a trial on sedition charges and an eventual not guilty verdict. I think most of them, they get pled down. And part of the reason would be, I mean, listen, on both sides, based on the history of federal sedition charges, if you're the lawyer for one of these rioters, you understand that although it may not be likely to be found guilty on sedition, it's a very big hill to climb for the federal prosecutors, that if your client was guilty of sedition, it would be really bad. So you may go to them and say, listen, it's really in our interests not to put this to trial. And you may have a rioter who's more likely to accept a plea on some lesser charge. If you're the prosecutors, even, mean, listen, even if you feel pretty good about a sedition charge, if it's not bulletproof as far as you're concerned, it's also a risk to you to put that to trial and possibly get an acquittal and end up getting nothing against some of these rioters. So we may see the charges. The prosecutor says that he believes there's evidence for it, a sedition charge on some of these cases. But I think if you get it, both sides would be well incentivized to plead it down. And I wouldn't be at all shocked if very few or even none of the sedition charges ever actually go to trial, where you get a determination of guilt or lack of guilt on a sedition charge. I could be wrong. We're going to follow it. That's the latest we know as of right now. One of our sponsors is Vincero Watches, giving you 15% off. A high-quality wristwatch is the perfect way to elevate your style. Own at least one watch that makes you feel great when you put it on. You can often see me wearing my Vincero watch on the show. Mine is the gunmetal vessel model. I'm a big fan of the metallic look of the face of the watch. I like the silicone strap. You won't find a better made watch for this good a price anywhere else. When you put it on, you know you got more than you paid for. Vincero believes in crafting super quality watches from high-end materials, but selling them at fair prices, which is why they have over 26,000 five-star reviews. And they stand behind every watch they make with a 1-year return policy and 5-year warranty. They'll give you 15% off everything in their store and free shipping at davidpakman.com/watch. Use the coupon code Pakman.